In the deep dark silence of the Atlantic Ocean, where sunlight fades into blackness and pressure crushes steel like paper, something ancient waits. Not just a wreck, not just a story, but a secret long buried beneath layers of salt, time, and silence. A team of divers descends into this abyss, not for treasure but for truth. They aren't adventurers, they're truth seekers, drawn to whispers of a wreck that doesn't belong. What they find sends shockwaves through history. It's a Nazi submarine, sealed, silent, and fully intact. But there's one problem: it's in the wrong ocean. U-869, believed lost near Gibraltar, is lying off the coast of New Jersey, and no one can explain how. There are no military records, no sonar logs, no reported sightings, nothing. Yet there it is. Inside its rusted frame are answers that challenge everything we thought we knew about World War II. Who was on board? Why? Was it here? And how did a tarnished butter knife become the key to unraveling a decades-old mystery? This is not just the story of a submarine, it's the resurrection of 56 voices lost to time. Dive in, because what lies below doesn't just rewrite history, it remembers it. In the twilight years of World War II, when the Atlantic had become a graveyard of steel and men, Nazi Germany deployed a weapon designed to haunt the deep, U-869. She wasn't just another submarine. U-869 was one of the Type 9C-40 class, the most advanced long-range U-boats of their kind. Sleek, powerful, and nearly 250 feet of engineered menace. 6 torpedo tubes, a crew of 56. She was built to disappear beneath the waves, strike without warning, and slip away unseen. To the Allies, these boats were underwater assassins. Launched in 1943, U-869 embodied Nazi confidence. She was the product of a war machine that still believed it could turn the tide. Her mission was clear: infiltrate, destroy, and vanish. By 1945, however, the war had changed. The Allies were pushing back hard. German command was disorganized. Orders were rushed, changed, cancelled, then changed again. And in that chaos, U-869 received her final mission. She was ordered to patrol the treacherous Strait of Gibraltar, a narrow, congested choke point teeming with Allied ships. It was supposed to be a suicide run, but that was the order. Or was it? In early February 1945, the US Coast Guard reported sinking a U-boat near Gibraltar. No photos, no wreckage, just a sonar contact, some depth charges, and a few surface bubbles. The Navy assumed it was U-869, case closed. Another enemy vessel ticked off the list. No one questioned it. The war was ending. Paperwork was messy. Everyone moved on. For decades, that report stood unchallenged. Historians accepted it. The German Navy never pushed back, and the families of U-869's crew mourned a ghost with no grave. But here's the truth: U-869 never got to Gibraltar. She was never sunk there. The report was wrong. No one noticed because no one was looking, until decades later, 2 divers found a rusting hull off the coast of New Jersey, a place where no German sub was ever supposed to be. And that's where the legend of U-869 stopped being history and became a mystery. War breeds confusion, and in the waning months of World War II, that confusion seeped into everything, even the way the dead were counted. According to wartime records, U-869 was sunk near Gibraltar in February 1945. A US Coast Guard cutter reported a sonar contact, launched a volley of depth charges, and watched as the ocean briefly boiled. They believed they'd hit a German sub. No visual confirmation, no wreck, no proof. But they assumed they got the kill. So the Navy stamped the file: U-869 destroyed. Another U-boat down. That was it. No questions, no follow-up, case closed. But the assumption was never verified. And the evidence? Flimsy at best. There was no wreckage recovered, no remains, no debris field, not even a serial number. Just an unconfirmed sonar contact and an optimistic report. Wartime reports were often messy, rushed, and wrong, compiled by men under pressure, dodging torpedoes, and writing history with incomplete data. Yet this one was treated as gospel. Even the German Navy assumed the report was accurate. U-869's last message, sent January 10, 1945, reported fuel levels but failed to acknowledge a critical order rerouting it away from Gibraltar. German command believed it was in the strait. When the submarine vanished, they believed it died there. And so, a mistake was baked into the record books. For 40 years, no one challenged the story. Not the US Navy, not military historians, not the grieving families. Everyone accepted that U-869 had simply disappeared in enemy waters, leaving no trace and no survivors, except that wasn't the truth. U-869 had been rerouted, ordered to a different patrol zone, possibly off the US coast, but no one caught the miscommunication, and no one bothered to search outside the official narrative. While files yellowed in forgotten archives, the real U-869 lay intact on the ocean floor, 3,000 miles away from where the world thought it died. And for decades, the truth sat silently, ignored by history, until two divers decided that maybe the ocean had more to say, and that one wartime error was about to unravel everything. Summer 1991. The water was warm, the air thick with salt, and the soundtrack was pure classic rock. Off the coast of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, a team of weekend thrill-seekers prepared for another deep dive. But what they were about to find wouldn't just be another wreck. It would rewrite history. John Chatterton and Richie Kohler were no amateurs. These were technical divers, people who voluntarily entered pitch-black, high-pressure death zones for fun. Not tourists, not hobbyists, obsessives. Their mission? To explore unexplored wrecks scattered across the ocean floor, forgotten pieces of metal history lost to time. That summer, they were working a grid, chasing shadows on sonar. One ping, in particular, stood out. A sleek, elongated shape lying 230 feet below the surface, about 60 miles offshore. It looked like a submarine, but that made no sense. New Jersey wasn't exactly a hotspot for Nazi war relics. The East Coast had its share of wrecks, but a German U-boat? That would be like finding a Roman chariot buried in Times Square. Still, curiosity won. They suited up, ran safety checks, and descended. The moment they hit the wreck, they knew something was off. The current was vicious. Visibility was nearly zero. The shape beneath them loomed massive and unfamiliar, twisted. Net-wrapped steel, eerily preserved. No cargo holds, no open decks. It was claustrophobic, silent, but it was clearly a submarine. German in design, but unidentified. On the surface, the team scrambled for records. They checked every available list, but nothing matched. According to every historical account, no U-boat was ever lost anywhere near that site. It simply didn't exist, which meant this wasn't just a discovery, it was an anomaly. They nicknamed it U-Who, and it became their obsession. For years they returned, again and again, risking death with every dive. These weren't ordinary scuba trips. These were high-risk operations, requiring mixed gases, precision timing, and nerves of steel. One wrong move, and your brain could shut down from nitrogen narcosis, or you could get trapped forever in the wreck's jagged, corroded halls. And still, they kept going. Because they knew they hadn't just found a wreck. They had found a ghost. A story erased from history. And they were going to make it speak. At first, the wreck kept its secrets locked tight. No hull number, no insignia, no paperwork, just rusted silence and twisted steel. But John Chatterton and Richie Kohler weren't weekend thrill chasers. They were obsessed. Every descent into the cold depths brought new fragments. Metric gauges, German labels, unbroken compartments. The more they saw, the more one truth became clear. This was a German U-boat. But which one? No records pointed to a U-boat lost off the coast of New Jersey. The location made no sense. The historical accounts didn't line up. According to the textbooks, this wreck couldn't exist. That only fueled their obsession. And then they found it, a small, dull butter knife, almost overlooked, buried in silt, engraved on its handle, one name, Horenberg. It seemed insignificant, but to wreck divers, it was a revelation. Back on land, they hit the archives hard. They poured through German military rosters, shipyard logs, and crew lists. Then they found him, Georg Horenberg, officially assigned to U-869. That knife changed everything. Engine serial numbers matched. Internal layout confirmed it. The components, the gauges, the construction, all pointed to the same answer. This was U-869, the sub officially lost near Gibraltar, found 3,000 miles from where the world believed it had died. But one mystery unraveled another. If U-869 died off the coast of New Jersey, why had no one looked there? Why had no report ever surfaced? And how did such a massive error go unnoticed for so long? Their investigation led them to one more name, Herbert Gushewski. He had been scheduled to sail on U-869, trained with the crew, lived among them. But illness kept him from deployment. He was the only living connection to the men who vanished. They reached out, unsure if he was even still alive. He was. Living quietly in Germany, Herbert was stunned by what they showed him. Photographs from inside the sub, the engine room, and that tiny butter knife. Horenberg had been his crewmate, his friend. He recognized the name immediately. For 5 decades, Herbert believed the official story, that the sub and its crew perished near Gibraltar, that their deaths were documented, mapped, known. But now he knew the truth. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't do interviews. But he helped. He shared. Names, memories, and small truths no database could ever offer. Herbert passed away in 2005, but his knowledge and that single butter knife turned a forgotten wreck into a verified revelation. And it all started with a simple question. Who were these men? Once U-869's identity was confirmed, Chatterton and Kohler began diving deeper, literally and emotionally. They weren't just investigating a wreck anymore. They were entering a steel coffin preserved by pressure and time. Inside, it felt like the war had never ended. The ocean had sealed the sub in a near-perfect vacuum of darkness, cold, and stillness. The result? A haunting preservation unlike anything they'd ever seen. The crew quarters were tight and suffocating. Bunks stacked like filing cabinets, barely large enough for a man to curl into. Some still had bedrolls. One had a bloated paperback book tucked under a pillow. Another had a tin cup hanging from a hook, gently swaying in the current. In the mess area, utensils lay scattered. Plates still sat on the table as if dinner had been interrupted. One unopened ration can looked like it had been set aside for later. But there was no later. In a burst-open locker, they found items that stopped, them cold. A rusted harmonica, a pair of worn leather gloves, a sealed deck of playing cards. These weren't artifacts. They were echoes of daily life. Someone had brought music with them. Someone had brought games. That human touch pierced through the historical haze. The control room was a chaotic tangle of shattered glass, rusted levers, and blown panels. Yet some switches were still in the on position. Lights that hadn't glowed in 50 years. Orders still waiting to be executed. And then came the torpedo room. Several of the launch tubes were still sealed. That discovery raised chilling questions. If U-869 had been under attack, why hadn't it fired back? Why were the weapons still locked in place? Was there no warning? No chance? Or was the true threat already inside? The torpedoes were missing, either removed or displaced. But what remained painted a picture of tension unspent. The crew had been ready, but they never got the chance. Throughout the wreck were relics of routine, shaving kits, toothbrushes, photographs in plastic sleeves, names stitched into uniform patches. One mirror, cracked but still reflective, caught the diver's lights and gave back a ghostly glint. Someone had looked into that mirror, perhaps hours before death, adjusting his collar, thinking about home. These weren't villains. They were young men, most barely out of their teens. Some believed in their mission, some probably didn't, but all were trapped in the machinery of war. The ocean didn't care. It kept their secrets, their fears, and their final moments until now. U-869 wasn't just metal and memory. It had become something else, a time capsule, a tomb, a testament, for all the physical evidence recovered, artifacts, documents, crew confirmations. One question about U-869 remained unanswered. How exactly did it go down? Two dominant theories have emerged, and both are steeped in tragedy. The first theory is the most haunting, the Circle Runner. During World War II, Both Allied and Axis forces dealt with malfunctioning torpedoes. Some would malfunction upon firing, turning in a tight loop instead of following their intended path. In the worst cases, they would return to the very sub. That launched them. A suicide shot, an accidental death sentence. The theory is that U-869 fired a torpedo, perhaps as a test or in the fog of war, and that it arced back and struck the sub mid-body. The internal damage observed in the wreck supports this idea. Steel was crumpled inward. The explosion signatures pointed to a blast from inside, not an external weapon. Even more chilling, several torpedo tubes were still sealed, suggesting the crew never fired a shot in defense. The second theory, an attack by US destroyers. According to official US Navy records on February 11, 1945, the USS Howard D. Crowe and USS Coiner detected a submarine off the East Coast. They launched a well-coordinated depth charge barrage and reported the destruction of a German U-boat. That sinking was officially logged as U-869, but when Chatterton and Kohler found the actual wreck, discrepancies began to emerge. The location was close but not exact, and the damage wasn't consistent with what you'd expect from a full-scale depth charge attack. There was no evidence of massive external hull rupture, no torpedo launch, no scattered debris pattern typical of a destroyer kill. So which version is true? Some argue the Navy got the wrong sub, that they did sink a U-boat, but it wasn't U-869. Others believe that U-869 was caught by surprise and never had time to respond. Then there's the third possibility, less proven but frequently whispered, a covert mission gone wrong. U-869 may have been rerouted without proper documentation. German communications in 1945 were a disaster. Records were lost, orders were misunderstood, or never logged. Was U-869 delivering materials, landing agents, engaging in a secret operation? The truth may never be known. What's left is a tug-of-war between official history and physical evidence. The Navy still stands by its story. But wreck divers, naval experts, and historians have leaned increasingly toward the circle runner explanation. Because the evidence, at the wreck site, the sealed tubes, the internal collapse, the quiet around its demise, feels too precise to ignore. In the end, it's not just about how U-869 sank. It's about the silence that followed, a silence that buried a truth so deep, it took 50 years, 2 divers, and a butter knife to bring it back into the light. World War II often feels like a closed book, bound in museums, summarized in documentaries, reduced to names, dates, and black and white photos. But the ocean doesn't forget, and some stories don't fade, they just wait. The wreck of U-869 wasn't discovered by governments. It wasn't found by military expeditions or funded institutions. It was 2 guys with a sonar rig, a dive plan, and a need to know what was hiding in the dark. And what they uncovered wasn't just metal. It wasn't just engineering. It was 56 lives, frozen at the moment history chose to forget them. Inside, U-869 everything spoke. A harmonica tucked into a locker, a butter knife engraved with a name, a cracked mirror still reflecting a sliver of light. These weren't the spoils of war. They were the fingerprints of young men who laughed, joked, dreamed, and never surfaced again. Some were loyal Nazis, others were scared teenagers obeying orders. But under the Atlantic, it didn't matter. The water made them equal. The wreck made them human. What struck the divers wasn't just the preservation, it was the presence. You could feel it, like the ship was still waiting, not for rescue, but for recognition. And when they listened, really listened, the wreck told them a story different from the textbooks. It challenged the neat endings and perfect records. It reminded them that war is messy, that records are flawed, and that truth can sink without a trace, but it can also resurface. That's what makes U-869 so important. For every sunken sub, there may be a name unspoken. For every steel tomb, on the seafloor, a family still wondering. And now more than ever, we have the technology to find them. Side-scan sonar, deep-diving submersibles, DNA analysis. But the question isn't if we can find more. It's whether we care enough to try, because history isn't finished. It's still down there, covered in silt and silence, waiting for someone to ask the right question, to challenge the official version, to dive deeper. John Chatterton and Richie Kohler did that, not for fame, not for fortune, but for the truth. And when they brought U-869's story to the surface, they didn't just rewrite a footnote. They gave 56 young men a second chance to be remembered, not as villains or victims, but as people caught in the undertow of history. The ocean remembers everything, every echo, every mistake, every soul. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it lets us remember too. So if this story moved you, share it, talk about it, let it echo again. Because some ghosts aren't trying to haunt us. They're just waiting for someone to finally say their names out loud.